Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the One Water Perspective Summer Webinar Series. We're excited to continue to hear from thought leaders, regional managers, policymakers, and practitioners from across the country and eager to learn more about their local accomplishments, lessons learned, and activities currently underway in their region. We're continuing the series today with a presentation from Marc Cammarata, member of the UN Mid-Atlantic Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Please be sure to join us next week when we cross the country and hear from Paula Kehoe, Director of Water Resources at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Details for that webinar will be sent out tomorrow. We do record each webinar and post them to our YouTube channel. A link will be disseminated as soon as it's available. Couple housekeeping items for anyone that's new to the series. You have entered the webinar muted, so please enter your questions in the chat queue, and barring any technical difficulties, I'll try to turn on your mic at the end of the presentation to facilitate a fruitful discussion with Marc. And with that, I am excited to introduce our presenter for today. Marc Cammarata is the Deputy Water Commissioner for Planning for the Philadelphia Water Department. His responsibilities include the integration, direction, and management of numerous aspects of the department's planning initiatives and environmental services, including strategic environmental and sustainability programming, water quality and quantity modeling, wet weather compliance, flood mitigation, both green and traditional infrastructure planning, stream and wetland restoration, laboratory services, and climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. His division is leading the efforts for the Green City Clean Waters program, which integrates land-based urban sustainability goals with the goals for clean, safe, attractive, and accessible rivers and streams. He has 20 years of experience in water resources engineering and environmental planning. He is a professional environmental engineer with a graduate degree in civil and environmental engineering from Villanova University and a master's of science in water resources engineering from Drexel University. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marc. Again, you have entered muted, so any questions you have, please put them in the queue and we'll get to them at the end.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all for attending this webinar series. I'm really excited to share what I hope is a good chunk of information with you all. Lots of slides, lots of talking points, so I'm going to jump right in. I don't usually get 45 minutes or so to present, so really excited, and hopefully you hear that through the phone and not being able to see my body language, but I'm pretty excited right now. So thank you. I'm going to present today kind of about 20 years of history of Green City Clean Waters, a little bit of the lead up to it, but mostly our 7 years of implementation and kind of what we've learned and what we're doing to hopefully be able to do this program for another 70 years or so. I always like to start with kind of showing that City of Philadelphia Combined Sewer Overflow Long-Term Control Plan Update phrase. That is why we came up with, I think, a much catchier name like Green City Clean Waters. But the reason I say that term is that this is a compliance obligation. It is a 25-year consent order and agreement that we have with our state and federal regulators to mitigate the effects or abate combined sewer overflows in the Philadelphia region. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll see that it's so much more and really kind of brings the spirit of Green City Clean Waters to life here. So just wanted to give a basic, I rarely do this, but I realize this may be more of a national presentation here. So I just wanted to give a little glimpse into Philadelphia and give some of our gratuitous Art Museum, Love Park statue, Liberty Bell, and our typical row homes here in Philadelphia. But really just wanted to make the point here that we are a pretty large utility serving, 1.5 million people from our population, but we do provide drinking water and wastewater services outside the city. We're about 135 square miles, which is a pretty decent size here, and that we're kind of a 60-40 split with combined sewers and separate sewers. To kind of further elaborate on that, just to give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of the things here we do, you can see in the lower corner here, this is the Philadelphia boundary. We are downstream of two very large watersheds that act as our drinking water sources here. We have 3 large water treatment plants distributing over 300 million gallons per day, 3,000 miles of water mains and numerous pump stations. We also treat wastewater from over 2.25 million people in the region. We have a dry weather capacity of around 522 million gallons per day and a wet weather treatment capacity of almost 1.3 billion gallons. and we are responsible as well for stormwater for the city of Philadelphia. So lots of responsibilities, and you can just see some of the distribution there. And I will get into what that smattering of dots means later on in the presentation, but that's the part I'm real excited to share with you today. Being a fully integrated utility that has those responsibilities, we have a lot of compliance obligations that are presented to us as well. We have combined sewer overflow requirements. We have our separate stormwater permits. We are responsible for stream and habitat work. We have some sediment-related TMDLs. We have to protect our drinking water supply for, as I said, over 2 million people. And we do this all obviously with a stakeholder in mind, with our ratepayer in mind. That is how we collect money, and that is how we do our business. So yes, definitely integrated. We think long-term, we think watershed-wide, and we think not just about the now, but how we're investing in approaches that help us meet future regulatory requirements. Unfortunately, being an old urban center, when you start thinking watershed-wide, when you start looking at your water environment and what's remaining of it, when you do have combined sewer overflows and separate sewer areas, we have a lot of issues. And a lot of people say, why are you showing this slide? This is terrible. But this is the challenge. This is what we're up against as water resource managers. How do we take poor habitat and stream channels and vandalism and odor issues and channelized portions? These are the water resources we need to protect. And in order to protect that, we have to think a little bit differently about what the solutions may be. Understanding that maybe some folks on this call may not know combined sewer versus separate sewer, very quickly just wanted to show the difference. They both have their problems. In dry weather, we actually can treat a lot of the sanitary flow, all the sanitary flow that falls in our pipes, we're able to treat it. But during wet weather, we actually exceed the capacity, and that's where the problem here is. We get diluted sewage, we get all kinds of stuff, antifreeze, oils, pet waste, you name it. The stuff in your toilet, the stuff in your washing machines, all have the potential to kind of exit and hit our water bodies. And that's really the challenge we're going to focus on today, is trying to meet combined sewer overflow policy requirements. Just to give a little bit of glimpse that this is not a national, it is a national issue, but it's very specific to certain areas throughout the country. Philadelphia is one of those communities that is subject to combined sewer overflow policy, as it all kind of started out of the Clean Water Act in 1994. The program we're discussing today is much bigger than just the green aspect, but our green infrastructure piece is the backbone of our program. I say that, and I'm going to focus on this as we go through kind of the lessons learned and the implementation of the last 7 years. This is a 25-year plan. This is a multi-billion-dollar, we estimated it in 2009 to be a $2.5 billion plan. We may actually be spending more than that, and that's one of the points that I'll raise later on in this conversation. It's not just a green program. It relies heavily on plant expansion, upgrades, and relies on relining a whole bunch of our crucial intercepting pipes throughout the city here. You can't have a green infrastructure, nature-based, source control type of approach without having a very, very strong traditional infrastructure backbone. So I want to make sure I give the credit to our traditional infrastructure that's due. Keeping water out of your sewer system doesn't mean anything if you don't have a sewer system that's doing the majority of the work. So I will definitely be focusing on the non-traditional elements of infrastructure, but very much respect, appreciate, and I'm grateful for the traditional infrastructure that is there. So 25-year program with 5-year implementation chunks, and I'll get into this a little bit more. So what is green infrastructure? This may be redundant or obvious to most folks, but I really just wanted to focus on a lot of these key words here. We look at any bit of infrastructure that does interception, infiltration, evaporation, transpiration, some harvesting and reuse, and even some instances where we get storage and slow release back into the system, all meet the kind of terms of our greened acre. The greened acre, although it sounds like it's a physical dimension, it's actually a volumetric measurement. So we're looking at the amount of water that's managed, the depth of water managed over an impervious acre. So just to elaborate on that a little bit, if we were to manage 1 inch of water over a 1 acre impervious parking lot, but we did it with a small bioswale, as long as we managed 1 inch of water from that acre, we actually say that whole parking lot is a greened acre, even though the physical expression may only be 1/10 of an acre with a bioswale. But the opposite of that could be a green roof, where if you're managing an inch of water over a 1 acre green roof, that too is calculated as a greened acre, but it actually is a physical looking and acting greened acre as well. So it really is just a measure of volume and a measure of greenness to an extent. So I just wanted to clarify that up front. So that's the what green is. The why are we looking at green infrastructure? I mentioned that we're an integrated utility. We're thinking about the Clean Water Act, which is your fishable, swimmable, and we also think about what we have to do from a source water protection as well through the Safe Drinking Water Act, which adds that drinkable element to it. And then I mentioned thinking about our ratepayers and giving back and investing in our communities and trying to maximize the return on investments. And then you add the safe, attractive, and accessible piece to that as well. So compliance meets ratepayers' needs and wants. And that, I think, is the benefit of green infrastructure. And a lot of the things you're going to see on the screen here, too. Green jobs, urban revitalization, public open space, adaptation and scalability and flexibility with dealing with a changing climate, advancing city sustainability goals, thinking about the whole system, not just end of pipe kind of solutions. So that's kind of the benefit of why we went down the green infrastructure path. I talked about the 5-year increments, and these numbers are kind of drastic. This is the point of time we're in right now. I said we're about 7 years in. We actually just hit our 7-year mile marker on June 1st of this year. And just to give you a glimpse of where we stand, I'm kind of giving you the good news. We're over 1,100 green acres complete. We have about 2,000 that are in works right now. So we're very much on our way to meeting our 10-year compliance obligation, which is June 1st of 2021. But what you can see here, these are big numbers. These are big numbers in a dense urban environment. So they're a little bit skewed towards the tail end. You see it's kind of an exponential growth. But we're looking at modifying or managing stormwater from an urban setting for about 1/4 or 30% or so, 1/3 of our combined sewerage section of the city of Philadelphia here. Pretty big numbers. So I tried to dust off a graphic we used for a big celebration to try to save some money. So this was our 5-down celebration. Just wanted to let you know we're 7 years in. And I wanted to focus on kind of the 3 tools that have been our major kind of delivery mechanisms of how we've gotten our green infrastructure to date and how we do business. And I raise this only because to me this is more about a philosophy. We knew we had kind of uncontrolled stormwater runoff issues in the city. So the first line of defense was us kind of instituting stormwater regulations. And I'll go into this in more detail. But when you know you have a problem, your first line of defense should say, maybe we shouldn't make it any worse. So we were able to interject ourselves into the stormwater, into the development process here in the city. And basically anyone that builds in the city now has to meet stormwater management obligations for channel protection, flood control, and water quality requirements. So the idea is that new development does not do any more harm here in the city. You look at the center piece there, the incentivized retrofits. So existing properties that generate stormwater runoff, we've actually come up with a program to incentivize retrofits where they actually manage water on that site and get a stormwater fee reduction to actually take water that is contributing to our system and try to limit how much is getting into the system. So the philosophy is kind of taking what is already there and trying to have it do less harm than what it does. You look at the third arm too is our direct public retrofits, which is kind of that last line of defense, which is if you're not regulating it and you're not trying to undo what's there, how can you strategically place and invest in new to kind of manage water and take some of the burden off your system? And that's the third arm of the program, is how we do direct public retrofits. So what are the fruits of our labors to date? 7 years in, you can see about 80% has been delivered through kind of private delivery, through private development, or through kind of our public-private partnership with these incentivized retrofits. And then about 230 or so acres that have been delivered by way of public retrofits. So that's kind of the breakdown. You're seeing a lot more dots on this area. You're also seeing dots that kind of transcend just the combined sewer area to be citywide. And that's because our CSO program, or our Green City Clean Waters program that meets compliance obligations, is focused on investments. That's the 1,000 acres in the combined sewer area. But our stormwater regulations, our incentivized retrofits, and our homeowner retrofit programs actually happen citywide. So again, it's Green City Clean Waters, the compliance program, is a little bit different than Green City Clean Waters, the philosophy, the vision, the ambition, the goal to think about our entire city and our entire region using nature-based solutions to kind of manage stormwater-related activities. What does this stuff look like that are not just dots? We've all probably seen green infrastructure, but I just wanted to show you some of the tools that we've implemented here to date. We've done park retrofits. We're looking at kind of bioswale and bioretention off of larger street segments of the city where we just pull water from the hardscape or the impervious cover in the street and bring it into the sidewalk area. We have practices like on the left where they're just subsurface infiltration trenches, where we have a little less space. We bring water in through inlet control and we feed it through a subsurface trench. Areas where we have the ability to integrate it into the landscape, we do more of the rain garden concept like you're seeing on the right. We modify some of our schoolyards. We try to keep as much water at the surface, right? Keep these things green and keep the green and green stormwater infrastructure, but sometimes they are stormwater management practices, and some of the magic is happening subsurface, like you're seeing more in the photo on the right, which is a lot of porous pavement and a pervious ball field where a lot of the water is actually soaking through into the underground basin structure. And then when we have the ability to do homeowner retrofits, we do some downspout disconnects, and we bring water to rain gardens or through flow-through planters or rain barrels. So just some looks and feels of what we've done. Some of our applications through our development regulations, which have really been embraced by the development community. You have an individual that or a company that owns a hardware store. When they did development, they managed a lot of their runoff through kind of periphery bioretention and swales on the outside. Or you have something like green roof development where people have been able to integrate that into their business model and into their usable space and into their financial gain by providing access by also meeting our stormwater regulations. And then just some examples of parcel-based retrofits and these incentive programs that we offer. You have people really looking at their land use, trying to figure out whether or not they really need that impervious cover. And just to give a little glimpse, we bill on stormwater here. It is one of our charges, obviously. We bill 80% based on impervious cover and 20% of your stormwater charge is based on gross area. We give individuals the ability to get up to an 80% credit by managing water on their, managing stormwater on their parcels. So you can see some folks have done parking lot retrofits, some additional folks have looked at roof retrofits, and some where they have the ability to look at ways to take advantage of their large land area and do kind of traditional retention, detention kind of concepts. So a lot of different things, and that's a glimpse. I want to get into, obviously, the lessons learned. This has not been an easy process. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of needs. And I'd like to give people glimpses into kind of how we've rolled out the program to date and see where the improvement zones are, or kind of a little more detail of what we've done to date. So when we originally started, obviously planning, we were looking at our street corridors. We were trying to say, well, that's dedicated, always going to be there, impervious cover. Let's try to look at that land and figure out ways to manage. So really our program started with a Green Streets retrofit program. We were looking obviously at your big pieces here, street widths and number of parcels that could be impacted and setbacks and slopes and utilities and infiltration. And, we realized this is not just going to be a Green Streets program. Although it's a lot of impervious cover in our city, it's got a very challenging environment and it needs to be just one tool in the toolbox. So we started thinking from a district planning approach. How do you tackle a big problem? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we started drilling down into kind of neighborhood-based planning. In this case, this is our combined Seward area broken down into 4 geographic boundaries. We have our river wards, we have our university section, we have North Philadelphia, which is definitely kind of a low-income, underserved community with different issues than some other sections of the city. So we kind of really got to know the geography and the spatial land use kind of breakdown of our city and built teams around that, built public outreach teams, built planning teams, built design teams that kind of catered to the communities themselves. Obviously, this is not a program that we're going to do on alone. You're going to hear me say that numerous times. This is a city program. This is a regulatory program. This is a nonprofit, philanthropic type of program. There are a lot of people in this space, so you can't just look at land areas and say, how do I manipulate them and how do I do them as a utility? How do we look at them as a city? How do we look at what other folks are doing? So how do we look at parks and rec improvements and what they want to do in their recreation facilities? How do we look at commerce and what they want to do with corridor restoration? How do we look at school improvements and try to figure out ways to piggyback there? So you can kind of see that we are an opportunistic, latching onto other initiative type of program because that's what's necessary here. You go into detail, and I'm not going to drill into this, just illustrations into, looking at it from a neighborhood scale and really trying to think where opportunities are, but then taking that down into a much more detailed, where does the water go? Where does the management practice end up? How much water can we get there? And really trying to drill into a very detailed inlet by inlet, impervious area by impervious area type of approach to really do site identification. And that lends you obviously to thinking about big scale at park and rec facilities, street scale like the image on the right, and in some instances trying to take a blend of that, looking at multiple street locations and trying to figure out ways to bring that to centralized locations to take kind of this decentralized stormwater concept into a centralized stormwater concept. And then this to me is a perfect illustration of how we really have built the tools or have the understanding of how we can look at a traditional typical neighborhood here in Philadelphia and figure out how to apply the tools that fit. So when you look at it from a land use standpoint, I won't go too much into that. That's just kind of the impervious cover breakdown. You look at things that we've already done for managing street areas. You look at projects that are in the queue of where we can manage additional street runoff with green street practices. You look at areas that we've managed water on city-owned facilities. In this case, it's park facilities. Projects that have gone through our stormwater regulations. Projects that have gone through our incentives program that have managed stormwater. You start looking at areas that we think, or the Planning Commission here, thinks are kind of ripe for future development, and you can see those are areas that we think will transform over the life of the program where we don't need to make direct public investment. We think we can get it through development. We look at areas that we think are primed for additional incentivized retrofit opportunity. And then you start looking at other city facilities, schoolyards, and the ability to start to pilot some residential rooftops. And you can see how you can transform a typical neighborhood with the tools that we kind of already have in our possession. So it gives us the hope and gives us the confidence that we have the right approach and the right tools. It's just how we kind of facilitate them and how we really spur action to get this stuff to happen. But you can see how that neighborhood can be transformed and how we think we have kind of the suite of things to allow us to manipulate the lands like we need to. The transition of what that means into design, I tried to sum up some keywords here. We've learned a lot of lessons in design. The first project we did doesn't really look anything like the project we did last week. And that is a good thing. And that's a key in thinking about doing this type of work for the long haul and thinking about ways to institutionalize it. So standardization, feedback loops, constant community input, coordination at every stretch of the imagination, whether it's internal with our kind of collector systems group or our operations group, our finance group, or our external partners, making sure our streets department does our street opening permits and our traffic controls. So constantly figuring out ways to standardize, streamline, and document all of the processes here that allow us to do our business for the long term. Obviously, keeping in mind, you have to know what your water quality goals are and how to minimize costs and site context, obviously not just now, but what that site may look like 5, 10, 15 years into the future. So lots of designs, which leads you to lots of different implementation tools as well. So this is one of our busier streets that leads up to our city hall here in Philadelphia. Major street. If those that have been to Philly know, this is a pretty important street. Well, that's the tool that we could have fit on that street. In some neighborhoods, we have the abilities to do bump outs, or we have wider areas and the ability to allow people to exit their cars kind of Portland planter style. So we're able to integrate some of these into certain neighborhoods. When you have space, we try to do the bigger rain gardens. We can get more water. We get the more nature-based piece of it. We take advantage of obviously all the benefits of vegetated practices. So we fit them into the landscape when we can. Same concept with swales. This takes advantage of the slope we have in this park facility. And we're able to manage a lot of water from the surrounding neighborhood in this area. And in some instances where you actually don't have the physical green expression, we're still able to do a large amount of stormwater management, taking advantage of infiltration through this large subsurface storage and infiltration basin. And at the end of the day, we're going to come back with a football field back on top of this. So we've kind of embraced the park setting and the park use there, and we're able to manage a large amount of stormwater. Standardization, again, is key. Everything we do is documented in ridiculous amounts of detail, and the idea is to distribute it. This is not just for city folks. These are for the development community. These are for the national community. Anyone that wants to see kind of how we're doing our business and would love to kind of chime in on how we're doing our survey work and geotech and our landscape and our CAD standards and standard details and, you name it, all of this stuff is documented for consumption by those in the space. And we would love to kind of take feedback and hear how we can kind of improve our program the way that we've done it to date. And, not to get into detail here, but again, just what you really need to think about from a requirements and a constraint scenario. This is engineered, it is infrastructure. It needs to be engineered, although it's natural. So we're constantly figuring out ways to kind of modify our design requirements and our guidelines. And we do a lot of this with the input from the design community as well. So just to kind of give you a glimpse in some of the key things that stand out to us when we think about requirements and constraints. And again, all of it's tracked, all of it is digital. We do this for metrics reporting. We do this for kind of information management. And later on, I'll show you how we use this stuff to kind of feed into our work order management system for the maintenance aspects as well. But a lot of this allows us to track data in ways that allow us to deliver it as a regulatory compliance obligation. So everything is scripted, documented, digitized, scanned, and tracked in extreme detail. Because this is obviously compliance-related material as well. That said, maintenance. When you're investing in the neighborhoods using nature-based solutions, when you're trying to make community amenities, obviously maintenance is a major component of what we're trying to do. And I don't want people to think maintenance is just the boots on the ground, removing debris. There's so much more in a maintenance program like wet weather and dry weather inspections. The reporting aspects of it, and then standards and protocol development so you can hopefully have efficiencies in maintenance moving forward. Just some glimpses into kind of growth of the program over the last bunch of years. We try to track a lot of our assets by stormwater management practice type, by vegetated area, by quantity, by count. All this stuff kind of helps us figure out how to deal with not just maintaining the assets, but how to build the resources that we need for a growing program. So we're looking at trends, we're looking at quantities. All this is kind of built into how we're dealing with living practices that are exponentially growing, as the days go by. Infrastructure, asset management. Again, key words here. These aren't just systems that we put out and hope that they live. We treat every single component of these things like the asset that it is. So they fit into our work order management system just like any other linear asset or any manhole or any fire hydrant or any pump station. Everything is coded and documented and given specific numbers so we can maintain it appropriately. And then just some glimpse into kind of what we do. The wet weather tells you a much different story than dry weather tells you. So the inspections piece is key. The subsurface elements, some of the practices have a lot of magic happening underground. So we take advantage of traditional kind of subsurface maintenance equipment with flushers and vectors and video cameras. So that's a piece of it. And again, complex systems, many moving parts. You need a diverse delivery or maintenance system. So some of these are infrastructure, utility infrastructure identification. Some of it is landscaping. Some of it's tree pruning. Some of it is trash and debris removal, and some flushing and vectoring. So a lot of different companies that have had their hands here. And one of the best stories that deserves its own hour-long presentation is a branch of the AmeriCorps, this group called PowerCorps, which are at-risk youth ages 18 to 25, which we've been able to bring into the department and have them support our maintenance program, giving them entry-level skills and allowing them to kind of help build our maintenance program. And I believe to date, we have 37 individuals over the last, 4 years that actually came through the PowerCorps program that now are directly employed by the water department. So it's definitely a workforce development program that has benefited not just our city, not just our community, not just the individuals involved, but the utility as well from a job creation and an employee growth avenue as well. I'm going to blow through some of these in some detail. This is a little bit more for kind of the take-home, but partnerships are key. Distributed infrastructure, building this on every land use we can involves a lot of partners. So this is kind of the high-level photo here. your city partners like Streets and Parks and Rec and Department of Public Property, who deals with our vacant lands, and our city facilities, our local transportation authority, our school district, our housing authority, our academic institutions. These are all some of our major partners that we've focused on in the first couple of years. Some of these numbers are a little bit outdated. I put this together, I think, for 2016. But the reason I'm showing this is to kind of just show who those partners are that are necessary to bring the program to fruition when you're looking at all these different land areas. So Streets, for example, again, it's the Commerce Department, it's the Planning Commission, it's your Transportation Authority, your Streets Department. And the idea is to try to integrate green into all things city transportation that happen either by us or by those partners. And some of that has to do with repaving and handicap ramps and piloting technology. So to kind of give you a glimpse in the projects, the partners, and the goals that we have when we embark on partnerships. And I kind of just wanted to run through this for some of these other partners too, but I won't touch on a lot of it. But obviously we have major highway corridors here in the city, some interstates that are being expanded. So having clear partnerships and goals set forth with them allow us to figure out ways for them to meet their stormwater regulations and their community investments in ways that meet the needs of ours from a stormwater management perspective as well. Parks and Rec has probably been our biggest partner to date. Their land area is kind of very conducive for us to try to figure out ways to improve it and bring additional nature-based solutions to it. And a lot of folks in the nonprofit space have been instrumental in bringing projects to life here, and specific shout-outs to the Horticultural Society, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Lands, and a group called the Conservancy. But again, a lot of stuff that happens on these sites are done in partnership, and it takes a village to kind of do what we need to here. So a little glimpse into that. This is an example of a parking lot retrofit near by the Philadelphia Zoo. This was a publicly owned parking lot. So we pulled street runoff through trench drain and just improved the parking lot, but it's at a very key location here in the city at the zoo. Looking at vacant lands. The idea is to not manage stormwater on vacant properties that may very well be developed for some kind of future growth here in the city. We don't want to preclude development. We want to actually take parcels that may not be all that good for development and make them kind of anchor sites throughout neighborhoods and bring stormwater and aesthetic improvements to them. So we're looking at vacant lands, and here's an example that's close to the vacant land concept, which was a brownfield of taking what looks like a traffic triangle and just making it more of a stormwater management practice and a little bit of a community amenity. And then schools, to me, is my favorite program to date. It's been one of the more challenging ones. But if you think about who we touch in this space, you have, obviously, we're affecting kind of students through curriculum, through living learning landscapes. You think about the faculty, you think about the parents of the students, you think about the neighbors that live at or near these kind of community centers, and they become very key or anchor community-based sites for us. And we're seeing a big push into trying to bring additional play equipment and additional amenities to just leverage our stormwater funds in the school space. And then public housing as well. A lot of folks are talking about, gentrification and how development in urban corridors has not really been good for the folks that live in those cities. And I think a partnership with public housing, one that we're working on, is showing that we can develop without displacing. And it's really exciting to kind of forge a partnership with the Housing Authority and figure out how public housing can happen alongside our stormwater investments as well. And we're just touching the beginning of a partnership with them. And I wanted to just sum up, leveraging monies. This infrastructure lends itself to leveraging money. Just some statistics through 2016, I think we received about $50 million that helped us with academic research, that brought in choice neighborhood public housing dollars that allow us to pay for school curriculum, play equipment, recreational equipment, trolley track removal and replacement in the street corridor. You can see how other folks are in this business to kind of meet their needs, and we can connect those monies with our needs as well, and we end up with some of these bigger, better sites. I don't want to underestimate or leave out public education and outreach. obviously a major component. Ratepayer funded, impacting communities, investing in the communities. We have to make sure that we have substantial programming around the engagement and education side. So that said, obviously we have online tools like blogs and websites. We take advantage of all kinds of social media. We have hands-on exhibits at some of our interpretive centers. We have art installations. We have design competitions. We have stormwater stenciling and your physical signage that we put at a majority of our practices, like in the upper left corner. So lots of different tools to engage lots of different audiences in many different ways. It's absolutely critical to how we do this. The STEM education aspect of this has been a wonderful story too that deserves more time. But what we've been able to do is build curriculum and educational technology-based, engineering, mathematics-based components into school curriculums. And those are a couple side stories as well, but it's really taking off here in some of our school programming. And just to kind of focus on this wraparound or two-pronged approach, we don't just want to let people know that we're going to be coming into the neighborhood to have a construction impact. Obviously, that's necessary. We want to make sure they're aware throughout the entire process. But the idea is to, when we leave, to let them know that they can still embrace it and enjoy what we've done as well. So it's that before, during, kind of after type of programming that I think has been one of the successful aspects to date. And we do, obviously, the notification piece, again, the before in the planning, during the design or the lead up, the during of construction, and then post-construction, obviously taking advantage of the celebratory aspects of ribbon cuttings and the adoption programs and holding organized events afterwards to really celebrate it. And these are just some glimpses into kind of what we've done to date and why we've done it. The residential programs allow us to work with residents in their own property, right, on their house, in their yards with rain barrels and flow-through planters. We work in the community as the goal of organizing the residents and the civic associations and then connecting those folks with it with adoption programs that have them maybe help us do a little bit of the basic maintenance and upkeep and act as the eyes and ears for the assets. And then you bring in kind of the inspiration, empowerment, engagement that you get through arts and interpretation. And we do that through some murals or street art or some of our storm stickers as well. So it's important. I mean, it's been really important how all of our tools connect and really engage our folks. Again, our philosophy is trying to give back to our communities, give back to our ratepayers, giving them something that they can feel and touch and improve their community, and at the same time improve water quality and quantity in our receiving bodies as well. So it's been pretty critical, and we've learned quite a bit of lessons. And the biggest one is it's not just that time of construction. It's really, or not just the people that are living near the practice. It's trying to engage the folks that don't necessarily live on that block that can still access, the things we're building. To get into our stormwater regulations has been another, prong here. I mentioned that any earth disturbance of 15,000 square feet or more triggers our regulations, and there's a water quality component, flood protection, channel protection requirements that they need to meet. This has been an unbelievably successful aspect of anything stormwater related, whether it's compliance, objective or not. This is a solid way to do business when you're a water resource manager, is to try to figure out ways to institute stormwater regulations that work with the development community, not necessarily against it. And that's a lead-in into, again, this resource piece. We provide every bit of information to help the development community out. We provide, website materials through online applications and project status, login stuff. We provide guidance manuals and tracking databases, and we give all kinds of information to the development community so they know what to expect, how to expect it, what our response may be, the status of it, because the last thing you can do is inject yourself into a development process and slow it down by any means. That's just very dangerous in a city setting, because development is growth, and growth can be good, and growth can be done in conjunction with the city, not against kind of city goals. That said, you have to make sure that you're turning reviews around very quickly. So you can't just have them submit stormwater concepts and you take 6 months to get to it. So we turn stuff around 5 days, 15 days. We really try to turn this stuff around as quickly as possible. And again, not just during the construction process. We're out there during the active construction piece, providing input. We're out there when projects are closed out to let them know that everything, was met the terms. And we're out there well after to look to make sure that they're still performing after construction closeout. And the benefit of this is we now have development community applying green roofs on buildings for density bonuses that actually have not triggered our stormwater regulations. So I think we've had about 25 of the 32 applicants that have submitted for a density bonus. They're actually not even triggering the regulations. So we're seeing people embrace green infrastructure and embrace green roofs without being required to do it. So it's really been an exciting story. I mentioned our credits program. We charge you for stormwater. If you retrofit your property, you can actually get a fee reduction. So it's kind of a stick and a carrot approach if you think about it. And the idea is not just giving you a credit on your bill as one of the carrots. We actually give you competitive grants. We will actually subsidize your retrofit if you're doing kind of cool projects and managing water that meets our goals as well. So we're trying to grow that program, and I'm going to realize I'm cutting short a little bit on time here, so I'm going to go a little faster. But our billing and credits and incentives program has only been around for about 3 years now, and it's been extremely successful, so much so that we're getting a lot of interest in growth. So that image you're seeing on the left is what we're calling a Stormwater Connect program. It's basically a matchmaking service, which allows folks that are interested in retrofitting their properties, so those that maybe see higher stormwater bills that want to bring those bills down, but it's connecting people to the construction community, the maintenance community, the finance community, the engineering community, and it's trying to figure out a way to match all these folks together so we hopefully can get a greater uptick in our incentives and retrofit program. And then we put out some RFIs and RFPs for growing that program based on recommendations that we're hearing from our Sustainable Business Network. So the idea is to consider and continue to incentivize retrofits and new tools. So back to the engineering piece here, I also want to say that, not just working from an aesthetic standpoint, this stuff does work. We monitor the heck out of it, and it's not just to look at performance. We're using monitoring as helping us figure out ways to implement easier, looking at ways to figure out how to be more cost effective and which systems are more efficient and materials and maintenance. And all this is kind of based on feedback loops. So we have a lot of tools out there for how we're monitoring. And the idea is, again, a variety of tools to measure certain things. So we look at drain downs, we look at recession rates, we look at overflows. We look to see if there's any drainage area discrepancies with our calculations, cloggings, surface infiltration rates, all kinds of stuff that we're monitoring because it all tells a bit of a different story. And then we have different tools we use, whether it's continuous simulation modeling, simulated runoff tests, capture efficiency. They all tell you a story, and there's a tool that helps you get to that performance metric that you're trying to get to. And then you build into that kind of a code base. This is all our code that's been built in to help us post-process monitoring information to kind of tell these stories. So again, the data management, data visualization is absolutely vital in how you're using it. And then just to tell you, these things are overflowing less. We're seeing higher infiltration. We're seeing more storage. We're seeing things more efficiently captured, less bypass. So those are kind of the performance requirements. So that's the engineering side of does it work. What about the social side and the environmental and the economic side of whether or not it works? So a lot of what we did when we embarked on this program was the people, planet, profit kind of concepts. And I intentionally strike out profit there because we're not profit-driven organization. We're a product-driven organization. But is this stuff coming to life? And I'm happy to say that it is. We are seeing non-traditional, returns on investment that are really non-traditional. So these are based on studies either done in the city or by folks that have used city data, national studies that may have been based on Philadelphia information. But for the sake of time, I just wanted to point out some of these key words here. We're seeing public health and safety, crime and mental health benefits, higher life satisfaction, well-being increased, decreases in crime, reductions in narcotic possession. You look at academic improvements with test scores and graduation rates, stress reduction. Again, these are data that we're seeing based on studies about co-benefits of nature-based design. So the stuff works and it's exciting. And from an economic standpoint, I'll give a shout out to the Sustainable Business Network report. This is a phenomenal report on the economic impact of Green City Clean Waters in our first 5 years of implementation. So just some sound bites in there from a tax revenue, from an industrial growth, from a jobs creation. I could definitely give a link to this report. It's connected to our website, but it's a phenomenal read, and it clearly shows that we can build a just and thriving and sustainable economy in a city, and green infrastructure can be at its core. So just to close out here, we have a long ways to go. I'm going to use the buzzword all the time, innovation. What does it mean? Innovation can mean a lot, but particularly I want to figure out ways, or we need to figure out ways to harvest innovation to help us with design improvements, construction improvements, and specifically maintenance improvements. Maintenance costs are higher than we want them to be right now, and that is what we have our eyes focused on. How do we start bringing maintenance costs down moving forward? But clearly innovation has a role for just not with programmatic efficiencies or with technologies, but also with project delivery mechanisms. I mentioned that incentives program, that grant program, that's just one delivery mechanism. What else is out there? What other delivery tools are out there? What other public-private partnerships exist? And how do we get into that space? We need to continue kind of the momentum that we have with our National Green Infrastructure Practitioners Exchange. That's a member-based 50 or so entities that meet frequently to kind of exchange information in the practitioner world. We need to continue to focus on the benefits of green jobs and the green growth. We have to continue to monitor at scale, because if we can't prove this stuff works at scale, then we don't meet the backbone regulatory compliance obligation. And then my favorite piece of this is how do we continue to harness the power, the opportunity, the excitement, and the potential of our community and our community partnerships to help us address a lot of the local needs we have. And then the long-term piece of this is continued integration with flooding and climate change and climate resiliency. So all that kind of fits into Green City, Clean Waters now and into the future. And that's just a nice little glimpse into kind of what we've done, and all of our website links to gather a lot more information. So that is that, 99 slides. I'm really thirsty. I'm going to take a sip of water. But thank you all.
Yeah, drink up, buddy. That was a fantastic presentation. Beautifully done. I love animations. They're so entertaining. So we do have a couple questions in the queue already, but listeners, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat queue. The first one is from Neil Gregg here at Colorado State University. I'm going to see if we can turn his mic on. Actually, it looks like that might not work. So he is wondering how you fund public retrofits, taxes or stormwater fees, or both, or what?
I don't want to call them a tax, because they're just our rates. They're how we set our rates. Every 3 years or so, we go to City Council and we ask for money, and we have the ability to set rates based on our projected expenditures in that time period. So we collect money from our folks and we invest it back in our neighborhoods. And that's not just for operating dollars. It's through bond debt service. We pay on bonds too when we go to the bond market to get capital bonds, municipal bonds. So we collect rates and we go to the bond market, and that is how we make our investments. So through a series of operating dollars and capital dollars. Our incentives program for grants are based through operating funds. But yeah, theoretically, it's coming from ratepayer investments that we collect by way of stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water bills that they get monthly.
Okay, great. I'm sure that answers his question. Mazdak, do you want to unmute yourself and ask yours, or I'll give you a second, and if I don't hear from you, I'll ask for you. Oh, I think I'll go ahead and read it. He said, lovely presentation. Are the tools for assessing the performance of these systems available freely for application in other cities or to other researchers?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, we have a monitoring team that is 100% behind open data and transparency, and every tool they develop, whether it's the visualization tools or the database tracking stuff, is all open sourced and freely shared. We try to distribute a lot of this stuff through kind of annual reports, but the best part about the water network or our the folks in our space is we're always willing to share. So it's more about connecting the right people to kind of satisfy those information requests. But our stuff is your stuff. You just got to get to the right people, but we're always willing to share.
Great. I suspect maybe Mazdak will be reaching out to you to make a connection there. Well, I haven't seen any more questions. I don't know if you have any concluding remarks. Maybe give another second for people to type their questions in or raise their hand.
Well, I'm very honest and open. So I'll tell you that we have a lot of challenges that are still presenting themselves. 10,000 acres is a very ambitious, number for sure. I don't know if we'll get there. I mean, I really don't. It's a big number. We obviously have to keep costs down. We need more partners in the space. We need more people helping. We need to figure out better kind of connection points and leverage points. But I'm real happy with the start that we've had. But we have some clear challenges, and I mentioned that maintenance piece behind it. We have a 26% high poverty level here in Philadelphia, which is enormous. So we have, to me, a workforce that's yet to be tapped, and a way to connect them with what we think is a community, a revitalization or investment program. So maintenance right now is one of my biggest concerns. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity, but we could definitely use some help in trying to figure out how do we reduce maintenance costs and how do we harness the opportunity that exists with the workforce, potential workforce here in the city. So, but I don't want to come across like, life is totally good. Where we have a lot of challenges that we face every day about, costs and performance and maintenance and people's acceptance and construction impacts. So yeah, definitely not intended to be kind of all is rosy, but to kind of give a glimpse is you can fit these tools into the urban landscape, and you can do it at scale. The question comes down to how big is that scale, and we'll find out. Hopefully we're in 2036 and we can tell you that it worked. But we're keeping close eyes on all elements of the program as we move along.
Great, thank you. We actually got a couple more questions in, so I'm going to see if I can unmute Tyler Dell here. Tyler, can you try and ask your question directly?
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So awesome presentation. What's been the technology that you've seen the most success with, particularly in reducing these CSO events?
It's a good question. We have a lot of these street side infiltration trenches, which do a lot of work. They do a lot of subsurface work. But I think our best performing sites right now have been these larger kind of park setting rain gardens. Sites where we kind of deliver water by either inlet control or curb cut, kind of like the one you're seeing on the screen right now if you still have it up. I mean, the pulling water from much bigger drainage areas into a larger kind of off-street location. Those are most successfully performing because we're really able to harness the power of the vegetation we can do a little bit of a higher loading ratio because we're taking advantage of the soil, systems that are there. You have more space and you have more acceptance by the neighborhood. So to me, for a variety of reasons, these larger rain garden bioretention type of systems, I think are our highest performing sites. But we're actually very surprised at how well our urban soils are infiltrating. Our infiltration rates are extremely high. And I guess that's probably an obvious only because it's a lot of fill material in an urban setting. So I guess it's, we're not dealing with clays, we're not dealing with rock. It is just kind of a variety of all kinds of mix of soils. So a lot of our infiltrating practices are performing extremely well. But rain gardens kind of stand out as some of the best performing.
Great. And then just a follow-up question to that. Have you had any instances or complaints about like maybe basement flooding or any of these groundwater nuisance issues?
Yeah, so it's funny. We've that was one of our biggest concerns. In an old city, you put water in the ground. Why does it not just end up in people's basements? We've had one location so far where we ended up with water in someone's basement, and we were not able to diagnose why it was happening. We thought it was an old, I guess, foundation from a remnant house. That wasn't the case. We did grout injection to try to do a curtain wall to seal it. We ended up tearing out the practice because we actually couldn't figure out why the water was getting this individual's basement. That was the one obvious. But we have a whole bunch of setback requirements. We do a lot of lining in areas where we think there may be any kind of residential impact. One of the issues we are seeing right now, and this is a really kind of unfortunate thing and tells a little bit of a story about aging traditional infrastructure, is some of the water we're putting into the ground through these soil systems are making its way back into compromised sewer laterals and water laterals. So we are figuring out ways now to make sure that that infrastructure is in proper condition when we site these things. So we're doing a lot more kind of CCTV work before we site a project. So it's not so much the basement flooding or any kind of impact on the properties. We're actually maybe seeing some short circuiting back into our systems. That's the one thing we're keeping an eye on. But surprisingly, not that many, and that's a testament to kind of our planning team for making sure that they're siting these things in the right location and doing some of their homework leading up to it, and also the design team for making sure that they're putting the belts and suspenders on it if there's any ability to get into having any kind of residential impacts.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, well, get ready because we got a flood of more questions.
Nice.
So you might want to grab another sip of water.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to see if we can get Dr. Grigg on the line here. Neil, are you there? Neil, I turned your mic on. Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
Great presentation, Mark. Yeah, I'm Neil Grigg. Well, you mentioned all these challenges, and one of my interest areas is employment linked to water programs. And because so much of what you do with the stormwater program is public good related work, is there a way that you could connect the maintenance challenge to that high poverty rate and develop some kind of a program where you could have a trained workforce of youth or other people who could help with your maintenance, train them for maintenance, feed that money back into the community and so on? Is any possibility for that?
Yeah, that group I mentioned, Power Corps, is an at-risk youth program where it's been going on for about 2 years at this point, and folks get assigned in kind of a cohort of 10, and they have a group kind of supervisor leader. They get stationed, with a civil service-based team. In this case, the Power Corps program was linked with our green infrastructure maintenance crews, and they spend 6 months getting kind of professional growth experiences. They get classroom instruction, they get on-the-job or on-the-ground training, and then at the end of the 6-month period, they have the ability to latch on to full-time employment through an apprenticeship program that connects them with specific civil service titles, and then the apprenticeship program leads to actual civil service titles, so maintenance crew chiefs or heavy equipment operators or anything along those lines. So we've had 37 individuals be employed at the water department through that program, but I think the numbers are probably twice that of individuals that have gone through the Power Corps program that either work for us or for a contractor that may work for us or work in the city now that have full-time employment have come through Power Corps. So that program is phenomenal. And for those that know Andy Cricken over at Camden County Municipal's Utility Authority, he's linked up with the Power Corps program as well. So it's becoming more of a national program, and it is clearly an entry-level, workforce entry leading into full workforce development program. So it's a great story, and we need to figure out a way to magnify that quite a bit more with some other programs like that in the space. But yeah, that's the goal, is to try to take underserved citizens and figure out a way to connect them to the good that we're trying to do. So yeah, I appreciate your comment, and we're just scratching the surface of that, but we know we need a lot more of that.
Thank you. That's a great reply. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Great. So unfortunately, the person who asked this question had to leave, but I think it's kind of on par with the same topic. And he was wondering regarding the excellent co-benefits you discussed, if some of them could partly be due to the greening-related gentrification.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the concerns. I think I raised this actually at the last UN convening. That is a big issue. We're hearing a lot more people in the practitioner, the implementation space, really hearing, we say property value enhancements, right? Like that's one of the positive metrics we say of that investing in green and brings investment to your neighborhoods. But there is the unfortunate gentrification piece there, and I don't want to link green infrastructure to gentrification, but it may be an unintended consequence, and that's why we really I don't know what the research space is there or how we kind of address that issue. But I mean, development is good, right? Development growth is good. It just has to be done, again, with respect to the environment, with respect to the neighborhood. But there's much smarter people in that space that need to figure out how to make sure that we that this stuff can happen in the proper way. And that's why I mentioned the kind of a partnership with the Public Housing Authority. To me, that's a clear, how do you have affordable housing and have them connect with sustainable, stormwater management and green infrastructure. So to me, an incentives program or a partnership that connects those two is about development without displacement, is about sustainability without, property, values exceeding, what people can afford. So yeah, clearly there's a little bit of a flag there, and we're going to have to figure out as a collective what that means and how we can kind of get our heads around it.
Great. I'm going to see if I can turn on Chingwing's microphone. She's got a couple questions. Can you give your audio a try?
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hi.
Yes, we can.
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm Jingwen Chen. I'm assistant professor of landscape architecture at Arizona State University. And I really appreciate your presentation. It's really fantastic to see how green infrastructure works so well there. Just a few questions. One is there any participatory design process that is being considered to be part of this program? Because studies have shown, if you engage your communities, even just the last phase of planting, for example, or how to configure it, rain garden, etc. So that the community will have more ownership of this green infrastructure and will be more likely to maintain, and you can reduce your maintenance cost. And the second kind of more comments is, I think one of the antidotes for gentrification is actually to ensure all neighborhoods have good quality of green infrastructure. If every inch, of our community has good design, and I'm hoping that could be the antidote for gentrification. So I just want to see what's the city's take on having more, community involved and ensure equitable, good quality of space for all neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really important. Our public engagement folks, they're so good at getting folks involved throughout the entire process. So the design charrette, when we're going through the planning process, during construction, we hold tours. Afterwards, we do voluntary plantings, or we do ribbon cuttings, or we just hold a lot of events. We try to get people connected through as many processes as we can. Obviously, in a safe fashion. They can't be on an active construction site, but we do try to get people to embrace and engage and connect with what we do in as many ways as possible. And you're right, it's been really successful in kind of the ownership and the connection with those practices that we see. And we have a structured adoption program where we give kind of civic associations or block captains, we give them a little bit of money for them to do some work, but we have adoption programs where people will actually maintain these sites. They will pick up some trash and debris, or they'll help do some plantings, or they will contact us if they see lights out or any kind of vandalism. So I feel like we are getting ownership, whether we pay them a little bit of money or whether they actually just respect the practices that are out there. So yeah, that connection piece is extremely important. And then as far as the gentrification piece, I mean, I think a lot of folks are impacted by stormwater through equity-related issues leading up to it, right? Whether we've had poor development practices in the past, or we've neglected certain neighborhoods, or we've done some things that have caused those impacts. So stormwater issues, I think, have caused folks to be impacted, but stormwater management allows us to give back to people that have been impacted by poor decisions. And your point of infrastructure in every neighborhood, right? I mean, stormwater management and green infrastructure can be applied pretty much everywhere and has been applied everywhere, right? It doesn't really care what your religious background is or what your country of origin is, right? We're able to go and manage stormwater where it makes sense, and that's usually where it falls or where it ends up. So I feel like, stormwater may have had kind of environmental or justice issues, but stormwater management is on the opposite end of that spectrum. It gives us the opportunity to invest in areas that have been disinvested.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and then there's a barrage of questions here from Mazdak, who I'm not sure if he's going to turn his mic on or not. But he's wondering if you have evaluated the effects of the program on urban heat, or in the broader context, have you assessed or are you planning to assess the impacts on community health, well-being, and livability?
The urban heat thing was really interesting because there was a lot of folks last year at the annual convening where, I was able to take some of the stuff that I heard out there and bring it back to our Office of Sustainability. We actually formed a heat team, which are looking at trying to find a targeted neighborhood where we know we have high heat stress related activities, high impervious cover, disconnected, folks, and are trying to figure out ways to actually do something. So we got some money, I think, to bring in a heat fellow, and we're really about 3 or 4 meetings into kind of framing out what a heat team is going to look like. But the idea is to target a certain neighborhood and figure out what kind of application, short and long term, we can do to try to reduce the heat stress in sections of our city. And unfortunately, 3 of the neighborhoods that we're looking at, the highest heat stress obviously has to do with our highest lowest canopy cover, as you would imagine, and our highest amount of impervious cover, as you would imagine, but is clearly linked to our poorest and highest minority population. So heat stress here in Philadelphia takes on obviously, all the things that we think exist in that space are clearly front and center here. So we have some real good people kind of looking into it, and I can definitely connect that team with definitely some of the research efforts that have been happening at UN. And I may have made a connection last year, but definitely can do it again.
Great. That's a really fantastic synergy to hear about. Okay, and then he has another question. He's wondering if there are economic benefits for private developers to participate in the program, and have you seen increased property values?
Yeah, so the private developer piece is interesting. The grants program is happening by private entrepreneurs. We actually do those incentives on private property. We actually have not figured out a way to give our money to have private delivery on public lands, because that's actually circumventing. We can't do design build. We're prohibited by legislation. So right now our grant dollars go to the private grants that facilitate retrofits on private property. It's different than the development regulations. We actually can't subsidize development regulations because that's a regulation. But if someone goes above and beyond what they need to do from a regulatory standpoint, so if they were supposed to manage 3 acres of impervious cover as part of their development, but they want to do 4, or they want to manage an extra ½ inch over the ½ inch of runoff from that impervious area, we can actually subsidize that piece. So yes, the private development community is well entrenched in kind of what we do, and we cannot be successful without the delivery of private private entrepreneurs and the speed and pace and business models associated with kind of private development. So we're constantly trying to figure out ways to harvest the energy of the private sector and figure out ways to do this. But we're a little bit different than maybe what like a Prince George's County is doing through a direct public-private partnership, because again, legislation prevents us from doing that here in Pennsylvania. We can't do design build by any means. We have to get a little creative in how we do that. But yeah, that economic impact of Green City Clean Water, so the first 5 years, there's a lot of statistics in there about the private development community and how much money they're actually making. The numbers are staggering, and I don't even want to quote them because they're bigger than I could even think about, but they're all kind of published in that study. And that study was done by a group called eConsult, which are pretty reputable in this space. I mean, a good financial kind of consultant group that pull a lot of those statistics. So I'll try to bring a copy, or I'll send you guys a copy of that report, which has a lot of good data in the private community.
Great, thank you. And just so I don't forget, if you're interested or open to sharing your PowerPoint, there's been a couple people that were wondering if they might be able to get access to your slides. So I'll leave that up to you if you're comfortable. Just email it to me and I'll pass it along. All right.
Yeah, I'll give you a Dropbox link with a PDF. So.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think that is all of our questions. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. This was just really a fascinating
no problem. Thank you all for paying attention and being part.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to seeing you in July, and hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone. See ya. Bye.